All right. Well, good evening, and welcome to TEDxRegenAll. My name is Eric Sauder. I am the founder and director of RegenAll, and work with a really amazing team that's helped to pull this event together tonight. I'll share a bit more about RegenAll in a minute, but I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of the night. So this is a TEDx event. Many of you are probably familiar with TED. TEDx events are independently organized by groups all around the world, and so we get to participate in that. Tonight's particular license is through TEDx, through TED's TEDx Countdown series. So these are specifically climate-themed talks that were aligned with the COP26 event in Scotland. And so you can see all the yellow dots there of wonderful cities that we're joining with. It might be the first time that Lancaster has been on a global map like this for some type of climate leadership, but we're going to try to make sure that it's not the last. So I want to frame where we are and why we're doing this to start off. This is an image of every year's average temperature since 1895. Starting on the left, and as we go toward the right, we see darker blues are cooler years, darker reds are warmer years, and you can see that it keeps heating and heating. And these trends, of course, line up with our CO2 emissions or changes in land use. And the core problem here is that if every person in the world lived like us, we'd need 5 Earths to support that kind of activity. So if you're into Earth counting, that's a couple more than we've got. So that's the ground basis for why we're doing this. Why does it matter? Because that kind of risk by 2050 puts 1/3 of all plant and animal species at risk of extinction. It will displace 200 million refugees. And if you only really care about money, it's going to shave $23 trillion off of global annual GDP. So this is a really big deal, right? It's not that we haven't tried to do lots of things about this. We've all felt really guilty about the things that we do as individuals. We try to recycle more and turn down the thermostat. Here in 2020, with COVID, we experienced some of the largest changes that we could ever imagine as a global society. And guess what? Emissions only dropped by 6%. I guarantee this year they've been back up to where they were. So to me, that says individual changes alone aren't going to solve the climate crisis. We've also been hoping that governments will step up in really big ways. We've hoped for greater national climate legislation, and we've seen here at the COP26 event, again, kicking the can down the road at a global scale. Good things are happening, but really slowly. And it's not like solutions don't exist either. There's a wonderful organization called Project Drawdown that's categorized the top 100 solutions for reversing global warming. The exciting thing here is that there is a way out globally. There are things that we can do. And if you look at the graph, there's all kinds of solutions. And there's no single solution that's the one thing that we have to do. You can also notice that these savings pay back about 2.5 times by 2050. So it really makes even economic sense to do this kind of work, even when you include the solutions that don't have a positive economic return individually. So there's a way out globally. We know what we could do. One of the things that is a big takeaway for me, looking at the drawdown solutions, is that 12 of those top 20 are related to land and food. To me, these are solutions that are deeply connected to our rural communities, right? And so much of our work with climate has been focused in cities, and for good reason. There's a lot to do there. But through regenerative ag, through land management, through conservation, there's a lot of work that is necessary from our rural communities as well. So this is really where I started to ask the question, what if we're solving the climate crisis at the wrong scale? And where I've really started thinking about a more regional approach to climate action. And that's how we get here, and that's the origin of RegenAll. We unite communities to identify and implement local climate solutions for a more resilient future. We work with households and businesses and communities to really figure out where emissions are coming from and develop climate action plans that help make real progress. And we do that at this regional scale where we can better understand our differences, where we have a shot at working through local politics, and have a chance to understand what a better and more resilient future could look like for our community. So our goal here in Lancaster is carbon neutrality by 2040. You might be thinking, why Lancaster? This place has a meaningful scale. It's not too big, it's not too small. 500,000 people here in the county is a sizable amount of people. We're close to all of these major cities and hubs around the East Coast. You know that Lancaster has a really strong brand identity. Anywhere you go, if you say, I'm from Lancaster, people are like, oh, I've been there. I love that place. Lancaster's also demographically representative of many of the US. We're about 1% off from the rural-urban population percentages for the US. I really believe that's one of the critical metrics for how we respond to climate. And then finally, it's not like this would be the first wild thing that Lancaster has ever done. Here we are in a place that has some of the highest density concentration of benefit corporations, highest concentration of refugee resettlement. We're a place that, even though we have a lot of work left to go on water quality, the improvements that we've made here are astonishing. Lancaster's already leading in many interesting ways, and many ways that I think can align with climate as well. So our task ahead of us is to foster bipartisan collaborations that actually work. If you're down on thinking that this is possible, remember Thomas Friedman's New York Times article from 2 or 3 years ago when he came and visited? He's talking about Lancaster being the one place that he can see where a bipartisan future is actually possible. That's us. This is where we could do it. Let's make it happen. We need to implement local climate solutions that create jobs and strengthen local economies. When we think about these big, vast Green New Deal visions at a federal scale, they're exciting, but it's hard for people to understand and comprehend. And how will that affect our community? When we start realizing these visions at a much more local level, where we know the way that community governance works, we have a shot at actually moving things forward. Finally, we need to recognize climate as a force multiplier. So climate is something that could make all of these other challenges harder to deal with, or it could make all of them easier by the way that we work through these challenges. And that's what brings us to tonight. We have 13 amazing speakers that are going to bring visions of why climate is important through the theme and the lens that they're familiar with here in the community. And then they're going to connect that to the future that could be, to the Lancaster in 2040, and why we want to work for that. I think you'll leave here tonight seeing how interconnected all of these different ideas are in our community, and why climate is a thread that weaves them all together. And also, that there's a better Lancaster out there that we can be working for. So that's what I hope you're able to take from tonight. And we're going to have speakers across these 5 themes: natural systems, food and agriculture, built environment, economy, and community. So first up in the natural systems category, natural systems are foundational to all of life here on planet Earth. There are 3 speakers that will be sharing with us their insight on what's being done here in Lancaster and what more can be accomplished. The 3 speakers are Allyson Gibson from the Lancaster Clean Water Partners, where she fosters the collaborations to improve local water quality. Jenna Beckett from the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. She works closely with farmers to clean streams in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And then also Phil Wenger from the Lancaster Conservancy. He's dedicated to preserving our wild lands and the biodiversity they support.
Hey Jenna, what's your favorite kind of ice cream?
Well, I really like cookies and cream, but my true favorite is the kind that cleans streams.
Of course it is. But tell me more, because there's a powerful story behind that ice cream.
So stick with me here. Ice cream comes from milk, which is produced by cows, and Lancaster County has more cows than any other county in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Both cows and streams are healthier on farms that have trees planted along the streams and a barn that provides shelter to the cows and also manages the runoff that might take manure into our streams. And that makes me healthier, even if I'm eating ice cream.
Ice cream and any local product that supports clean streams is important because unfortunately half of Lancaster County's 1,400 miles of streams are not healthy. They're not able to support basic bug life, and they're not safe for us to swim in or drink from.
The pollutants causing our streams to be unhealthy are sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And Lancaster County has some of the highest levels of these nutrients and sediment in all of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. These pollutants find their way into our streams from our land, from our backyards, our roads, our parking lots, and our farm fields. The way that we take care of our land directly impacts our streams as well as our climate. I'm Jenna Beckett, Pennsylvania State Director at the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. Our mission is to work with communities, companies, and conservationists to improve the lands and waters that flow into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. We're headquartered in Annapolis, Maryland, but our Pennsylvania office is located right here in Lancaster because there's so much work to be done to improve the ecosystems and streams right here.
And I'm Allyson Gibson with the Lancaster Clean Water Partners. My role is to facilitate the diverse and wide range of activities happening toward one common goal of clean and clear water by 2040. We are the backbone organization, and we exist so that everybody doing all of this amazing clean water work is going in a coordinated way.
We believe that we can meet our water quality goals and climate goals simultaneously while also improving quality of life in Lancaster. In order to accomplish this, we must all work together in new and inspiring ways.
Looking at the last few hundred years, we've dramatically changed the landscape of Lancaster County. We acknowledge that the Native Americans had land use practices, but they were minimal for thousands of years. Looking at a condensed timeline of land use changes over the last 300 years, we cleared the forest to make way for farms, but didn't create a conservation district until the 1950s. We initiated 2 industrial revolutions, but are only now dealing with the impacts of hundreds of mill dams that were built to use the water to generate the power for all of that work. It wasn't until 1972 that the Clean Water Act was signed into law. And we find ourselves playing catch-up, trying to address all of the climate and all of the water quality goals with a limited amount of time.
The same land use practices that have led to our unhealthy rivers also impact our climate. Lancaster County is severely deforested, as what was once part of Penn's woods now remains just 15% forested. Trees are integral to groundwater recharge as they slow and soak up rainwater. And tree roots not only stabilize our stream banks, but also the climate by storing carbon. Lancaster, as I mentioned earlier, has more cows than any other county in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. A single cow can produce 100 pounds of manure daily, which can cause severe water quality issues when not managed properly. Dairy cows are also the #1 source of methane in the United States, and methane is 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide at capturing heat in the atmosphere.
Lancaster County anticipates 100,000 more people by 2040. Growth must be managed well. Our circumstances are challenging, and if we don't, we will be in even more challenging circumstances come the next few years.
So, how can we work with you, the residents, businesses, and leaders of Lancaster County to keep the momentum building? You can take control as a consumer. Many products produced on Lancaster County farms are many products produced on Lancaster County farms are purchased by large companies such as Walmart, Trader Joe's, Purdue, Hershey, and Turkey Hill Dairy. The Alliance has built partnerships with Turkey Hill Dairy and Hershey to support the farms that supply to them with their conservation goals. These companies are investing in this work because of pressure from their consumers and shareholders. This means that you have power as a consumer to request a higher level of sustainability from the companies you love. Ask them what they're doing and share your expectations. You can create change within our supply chains.
Over the last 5 years, the Lancaster Clean Water Partners have increased the cooperation among many partner organizations across the county, and everyone has been part of it, and everyone has been able to scale up what they have been able to accomplish. The amount of dollars coming in for clean water work in Lancaster are now in the tens of millions rather than the tens of thousands, one grant at a time that we were used to. We're feeling that shift that's happening. We are thinking and acting bigger. We are going for bigger funding and bigger projects that give us bigger results. All of that is thanks to the motivated community members across Lancaster County that are fueling this collaborative work.
And with this growth, we have an opportunity to rebuild our native landscapes while we preserve what we have and construct new infrastructure. That kind of collaborative approach is what's happening right now in Lancaster. Local homeowners and companies such as Eurofins, Oak Tree Development, Rock Lidditz, Hempfield Rec Center, and Case New Holland are just a few of the leaders stepping up to bring back our native landscapes.
We encourage you to evaluate your home for green space, for green infrastructure, while promoting biodiversity, clean water, and a healthy climate. The Lancaster Clean Water Partners has so many organizations, just like the Alliance, and many others that are here tonight, that are experts in the field. So when you do those evaluations, if you need some help, go to lancastercleanwaterpartners.com and you can find lots of information on those local experts.
Sorry, Allyson.
You're good.
Get involved in your community, volunteer and donate to local organizations. Attend your municipal meetings, talk with your neighbors, and be a leader.
We believe in our ability to achieve these goals. Lancaster can be a better place where we envision thousands of trees planted on our streams, within our neighborhoods, on businesses and schools, and within our own homes.
We envision farms that are both bettering the environment and thriving economically, that are supported by responsible and engaged supply chains. We see a future with streams that we can safely swim, fish, and kayak in, and land that provides bountiful habitat for wildlife throughout the county.
We all live in one system. That system is as simple and as essential as the water cycle. What goes up will come down.
And when the water comes down, it connects us as members of a watershed and as part of a community. In Lancaster, we like to function as a community for success, interconnected with one another from the sky to the streams.
So cheers to clean water and a healthy climate.
We know from a UN report that 25 million acres of deforestation is happening now. That's an area the size of Pennsylvania lost every single year. We know that 75% of the Earth's surfaces right now is fully compromised by human activity. And nature that we need to survive is being pushed into smaller and smaller little corners all around the planet. It's happening here in Lancaster. We can see it with our own eyes when we sit in traffic and we see the warehouses, shopping centers, housing developments spreading across our landscape. and we worry. And we think, what can we do? We wait for our government to act, and yet they refuse. And then we think about the personal sacrifices that Eric talked about, the sacrifices that we need personally to give up. Will we stop driving our car? Will we stop eating meat? Will we stop ordering takeout and dealing with all the disposable Ziploc bags and paper towels that do our life? And then it comes to travel. Are you willing to give up travel? And quite frankly, I'm not. And so as a result of that, I end up having this hopeless feeling. That hopeless feeling, though, led me to think a lot about this and to come to the Lancaster Conservancy and to propose what I call a third way. A third way that we can act as a community to deal with this loss of habitat that is so critically important. That third way we call protect, which is defense, and restore, which is offense. So under the protect banner, it's what the Conservancy does. We look around this community and we look for those few places that trees still exist, places that need to be saved from development, literally. Those trees, those lands that are so beautiful, that have sustained biodiversity, that are carbon sinks, that offset our carbon footprint, they're being compromised, and we are losing them. We're losing them right and left. Between 1980 and 2000, we lost an average of 1,600 acres a year to development. Do the math, 20 years, that, my friends, is 29,000 acres lost to development, and that's an area the size of Manheim Township. That's 5% of our land here in Lancaster County lost in just 20 years. During the same time, the Conservancy only saved 4,000 acres. Wow, that's a pretty sad story. But it is changing, and the good news is we are acting locally. Development has slowed down to about 400 acres a year, and we're backfilling a lot, and the Conservancy is accelerating this defensive move of saving nature. So that's the good news. The good news is the Conservancy, playing defense, is trying to protect what we have for all the reasons. You know, the biodiversity, the storing the carbon, the cleaning the water, and cleaning the air. But that's not nearly enough when you look at the land lost to development. We must also restore. We must restore the land that we have. And so I'm here today to share that restoration story with you and for you to think about it in your own life. We have 190,000 individual property owners in Lancaster County. The average tract of land is 3.2 acres. You take the farms, you take the city lots, do the math. We have all of this land that each one of us can do something with. Something that's going to store carbon, something that's going to enhance the biodiversity, and something that is going to save you money. Now, who in this room wouldn't want to do that? I know I want to. And it's really quite simple. We need to put our mowers away, we need to reduce the size of our lawns, and we need to plant native trees, plants, and grasses. And we need to do that as every property owner. So if you look across the landscape, you think about the lawns. I drove in by Long's Park. It's all mowed. I went by the Red Rose Shopping Center. All their stormwater basin is sitting there, mowed. It could be a pollinator park. The Department of Conservation and Natural Resources estimates that Lancaster County has 100,000 acres of land that is mowed. 100,000 acres of land mowed, and mowed by equipment that actually pollutes the air more than what it stores carbon. And lawns are ecological deserts. I hate to tell you, you maybe have one or two types of grass, but other than that, you are destroying nature. Every time you get on a lawnmower and every time you push a lawnmower that is carbon-based, just to create something beautiful to look at. And so restore is this message we really want to bring to you tonight. We must restore our land, and our lawns in particular. And you might say, well, this doesn't work. This doesn't work at all because, well, we've always had lawns and nobody wants to change that. Lawns are a status symbol. They're an example of what we think rich people have. But I will tell you, there's an entomologist, a famous conservationist and award-winning author. His name is Doug Tallamy, and many of you in this room have heard of him. But he took 10 acres of lawn, just 35 miles east of here in Chester County, and he basically counted the number of species with his students at the University of Delaware, and he came up with less than 100 of all the plants, animals, birds, and insects that visited that property. And he said, I'm going to do the restoration. I'm going to plant native trees, I'm going to plant native grasses, I'm going to plant native bushes. And 10 years later, he had his students go back and inventory that property. And it was a bio success story. Literally hundreds of insects that weren't there before, dozens of bird species that had not visited that property for years. And there was an amazing rebirth that happened with that land. And so I'm here tonight to share that story with you, to say we can protect and play defense, but we must play offense with our existing land. And by doing that, we can create nature preserves on every single one of those 190,000 property owners that are owned by residents of Lancaster County. And so thank you so much for listening. The Conservancy tomorrow will be announcing our 50th nature preserve, a wonderful track up in Mount Joy Township that will be protected from development. But going forward, what I want to see is each of your properties joining that and having thousands of nature preserves. Thank you very much.
Convinced I'm going to have a moment where I try to get through the curtain and fall. Oh, we'll see. Wait for it. You never know when it'll happen. So did you know that 63% of the land use here in Lancaster is in agriculture? How we care for soil and grow food is critical to sustaining equitable food access here. Agriculture also presents important opportunities to sequester carbon in soils, embodying the importance of rural and urban collaborations that we emphasize here at RegenAll. We have two speakers in this session. Hawa Lassanah is founder of DECA City Farms. She is a local food advocate focused on food insecurity and urban farming. Steve Groff is a leader in no-till farming and cover cropping. He practices regenerative agriculture on his farm in Holtwood and is an internationally recognized leader and speaker, spreading the message in his book, The Future-Proof Farm.
Hi, everyone. So, we're going to start my TED Talk today by creating connection, creating a listening, and then creating a shared vision for what's possible in 2040 for a sustainable Lancaster. Whew. So, now my name is Hawa. First of all, let's start this way. We're going to start by creating connection, okay? So let's just acknowledge everyone in the room, your neighbors that are here to help create this shared vision, yeah? So just take a look to the left and take a look to the right. Make eye contact and say hello and thank you for coming. Hello, thank you for coming. Awesome, guys, great. So next, we're going to create a deeper listening and end by creating a shared vision. So my name is Hawa Lassanah, and I'm the founder of Discerning Eye Community Agriculture. Now, when I'm not farming or plumbing or doing construction, I'm a yoga teacher, so I am uniquely qualified to lead this meditation today, okay? So just trust me, all right? Okay. So, let's see. Now, if you'll indulge me, we'll start by, We'll start by using our imagination. That's what we'll do. So, what I'd like to do is create a little bit of connection with you all. And I invite you to use your imagination to draw two lines from me to you. The first one is eyes to eyes, and the next is heart to heart, okay? Now, in your imagination, just make those lines a color. It could be silver, black, red, whatever, okay? So get that in your mind there. Perfect. Okay. So next, we'll use our imagination to continue those lines. I have a visual guide here. We'll use those lines and continue them to the behind our eyes to the space between our temples, right? And draw that line down to the line coming in behind your heart, okay? Now, I didn't know I'd have to hold a microphone, so we'll see if this works, our visual representation of the connection that we've just made, okay? So now, this is me to you, and we're going to, now that we've created this connection, we'll breathe into this space here and dream. So what we'll do now is create a breath. This is one of my favorite exercises. It is called a 4-part breath. And we'll just inhale in through the nose. We're all wearing masks, so it's okay and safe. We'll hold the breath, and then exhale and hold on empty. Inhale the breath in, and notice just what full feels like. And then exhale the breath out, and notice what empty feels like, okay? Create that rhythm of breath, and hold on to it. We'll come back to it, okay? So we're all here to create a shared vision of what 2040 could look like as far as a sustainable Lancaster is concerned. So we're gonna complete the connection here and create a path into this collective imagination. So if you wouldn't mind closing your eyes if you'd like, and we'll fast forward 19 years. So 19 birthdays and 19 anniversaries and Spotify year-end reviews, 56 trimesters, 76 summers and winters, 3,420 school lunches, and 6,740-something breakfasts and dinners. Now, within the framework of a sustainable and food-secure Lancaster, what does an ideal situation look like to you? We'll create that in our minds right now. So take a few moments. How old will you be in 2040? What's the weather like? What does your neighborhood look like? Is it green, with grass and trees and native plants? How much energy does it take for you to get your food every day? Do you walk, drive, bicycle? Is it delivered to you? Or is it right at your fingertips, produce right outside your window? What about your community? How about this? Are you financially secure? Do you have a basic income? Does your neighborhood have financial security? Is there joy every day when you wake up and a sense of pride in your community for the things that they're up to? Now, let's take a moment to close out this vision, and I'll tell you about mine. Now, I'm a Capricorn, and I like to think about big systems, okay? So I knew that in the creation of discerning eye community agriculture, in order to achieve our mission, we had to radically rethink the way we use green space in this urban setting. We also had to radically rethink the way we foster the sustainability of our garden programs, our community gardens. We had to create associations of folks who are knowledgeable and passionate about garden farming and who are willing to use their time and donate their efforts to care for the community. We had to create structures that pair rural and urban partners to help eliminate food waste, and structures to include marginalized folks in the billion-dollar industry that is fresh food here in Lancaster County. And lastly, and I think most importantly, we have to retake, or I should say, give back the responsibility of care back into the hands of those who have the most at stake, which is us, the community members. Now, forgive me. So, now DECA is my vision for how we can be better served by our food systems. We create agency and inclusion for the betterment of entire regions, if not the whole entire world, community by community. Now, within this framework, DECA acts as a nonprofit umbrella for 3 sister companies. The first is Backyard Farming Cooperative, and its mission is to advocate for neighbors feeding neighbors. We create community around food, and let's see, what else do we do? So we create community around food. And also, we'll just go with it. Who cares what I wrote down? So we create community around food and also encourage residents to grow produce in their own backyards, right? We encourage residents to care for their communities by sharing. We host educational activities around food and empower our membership into leadership and service to their community. Now, the second sister company is called DECA City Provisions. It is our value-added food brand. And this brand creates volunteer and part-time job opportunities for members of our community. We also create a pipeline in concert with our rural partners to help eliminate food waste. We also do this by creating a freeze-dried line of snacks, meals, and pantry items. And this line extends the harvest. So when I pick a tomato today, it'll be as viable and nutrient dense as in 20 years as it would have been today. Let me just re-say that so the point gets across. A tomato I pick today will be just as nutrient in 20 years. Let that sink in. Our final brand is called DECA City Farms. It is our urban farming operations. It's where tradition meets innovation. We take, it is where our, DECA City Farms is where we test and build our sustainable garden techniques. So we use either raised garden beds to help improve soil content and increase accessibility, as well as aquaponic techniques and sub-irrigated planters to conserve water. Now, finally, let's see, what is the finally? So, I say this all to say that DECA City Farms and DECA Discerning Our Community Agriculture rethinks the entire local food system and creates one that is completely sustainable, creates jobs, wealth, and abundance for its participants. It creates benefit from partnership within and outside of the urban community, and creates benefit for our most underserved communities through education and access. And again, most importantly, it returns the onus of responsibility back into the hands of the members of the community who have the most at stake. Now, if your vision aligns with my vision, then I encourage you to support DECA City Farms on Instagram and Facebook. And you can also support our fundraising initiatives on GoFundMe and also on Facebook. Thank you so much for your time and your patience. Namaste.
Hello, Lancaster! Hey, my name is Steve Groff. I'm from the rolling hills of southern Lancaster County. And I've been a farmer all my life, but you know, for the past 300 years, Lancaster County has been a beacon for agriculture innovation. And I believe that we can continue that for the next 300 years if we embrace paradigms that will make for a more resilient climate. My forefather who came here first was Hans Groff, and guess where he settled? Groffdale, right north of Leola, yeah, about 1698, so a long time ago. And the reason he settled in that area is, he said in our family history, it was because of the soil. You see, the soil is really what makes Lancaster County special. Do you know that in the 1800s, Lancaster County was the highest producing wheat county in the nation for 70 years? Do you know that currently Lancaster County is the #1 non-irrigated county in the nation for gross agriculture revenue, over $1 billion annually? Do you also know that Lancaster County has the dubious distinction of being the worst polluter of the Chesapeake Bay? So, since my ancestor Hans Groff came here over 300 years ago, we've lost half of our topsoil into the streams and rivers and the Chesapeake Bay. We can do better. This is a picture of my farm soon after my grandfather purchased it in 1935. Now, if you look closely there, you can see I've outlined the ditches that were on those fields. You can't see the hills in this picture, but they were there. In the mid-70s, he started contouring his fields, and that helped, but it still did not eliminate erosion. And this is when I was a barefoot 7-year-old boy in 1971. When I graduated from high school, I started farming with my dad, and we had these ditches, and we had to close them in some years just to harvest our crops. I didn't like that. And so I looked into this thing called no-till, or no-tillage, is what we called it then, as a way to curb erosion. The Lancaster County Conservation District had purchased a no-till planter in the early 80s so farmers could try this new concept. And I convinced my dad, that wasn't easy, to try this. And that did help solve our problem with ditches. Now, at the time, I could have cared less about the Chesapeake Bay. I didn't know there was a problem. But the problem was the ditches. Later on then, as I began to use more and more cover crops, I tried to manage them better, and I heard about this concept of a cover crop roller from the country of Brazil. So I developed the first cover crop roller in the United States. And the RegenAll Institute heard about it a couple years later, and they started promoting this. And then a business here over in Whitehorse, Pennsylvania, I&J Manufacturing, started building cover crop rollers. They have built over 1,000 of these. Lancaster leading the way in innovation for cover crops. As I went on in my quest of cover crops, I started doing research with University of Maryland, Penn State, NRCS, USDA, and we started looking at these radishes that grow in the soil to help open it up and loosen it. So I saw this as an opportunity and literally started a seed business, the first cover crop seed business in the world to market cover crops. And it took me all over the world. Literally, I was in almost all the states in the US, province of Canada. I've been spoken in 13 different countries. And we branded it tillage radish. So it became really like a spark plug for the current cover crop movement. Again, Lancaster leading the way. Well, how does my farm look today? This was an aerial view not too many years ago. It's green. Guess what? There's no ditches. And this farm, my farm here, now is a sequester of lots of carbon. And so that's something that we're talking about here today. Now, over the years, you can see the progress here. Again, I just want to say, Lancaster leading the way. And just what is about the rest of the county? A couple years ago, I hired a pilot, flew to the county. This is a picture here just east of where my ancestor, Hans Groff, just east of Leola, and you can see how green the fields are. Now that's good. Currently, Lancaster County is doing a pretty good job, 70% cover crop, 70% no-till. But there's a lot of animals in those barns in that picture right there. Animals make manure. So we have a lot of these nutrients we have to deal with. And unfortunately, Lancaster still is the #1 polluter of the Chesapeake Bay. We need to reduce our nitrogen levels by 60 pounds each year on farms. I believe that's achievable. I really do, but it's going to take some educational efforts to do that. About CO2. Do you know how CO2 functions in the context of agriculture? Well, when you plow fields or till them, you're releasing carbon, or you're releasing, the carbon goes with the air and makes CO2, carbon, oxygen. CO2 goes up in the sky. Not good. So when you see a bare field the next time, that field is, there's CO2 escaping from it. We don't want to do that. We want this. We want our fields to be carbon sinks. This is a picture of my fields. Taking in CO2. Plants need CO2. CO2 is a good thing. We need it. But we need to manage it correctly. And so growing plants year-round on my farm is very important to do that. And this is just a graphic of that. This is just a quick little video here. You can see how it looks in the springtime, where the cover crops are growing. And then we come right back in with our cover crop roller that showed before to roll it down and manage it and control it. And then we have this, started planting CBD hemp. You might have heard about that. This is the first no-till transplanted CBD hemp, to my knowledge, in the world. And hemp is a great thing to sequester carbon. It's a great plant to be able to do that. So this is something that I've been working with, but not only that, there's a bonus here. This system I'm talking about has created a more healthier food product. And we are now working with Hershey Medical Center with some of the hemp CBD oil that I've grown, and it has been shown to suppress and kill some cancer cells. So little did I realize, many years ago, that what started out to fill some pesky ditches has ended up to doing cancer research with Hershey Medical Center. So, my challenge tonight, where will we be in the next 300 years? And I still think it has to do with the soil. It all starts here. I just want to say that we need to better understand how the soil was designed to function. We need to better understand how the planet was designed to function, and we need to better understand how the climate was designed to function. So would you join with me in this commitment to change the world, starting here in Lancaster County, so that we can have a more resilient soil, a more resilient planet, and a more resilient climate? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hawa and Steve. So infrastructure has been in the news a lot recently. The built environment includes where we live, buildings we work in, and also what we drive. These things all use a considerable amount of energy, and they have significant climate impact as well. 3 speakers tonight are thinking about these things a lot. Marcus Scheffer of 7 Group is a regenerative systems thinker. A core element of his work has been a focus on energy efficiency and renewable systems. Max Zahniser, also from 7 Group, is an expert in regenerative architecture and brings his multidimensional perspective to transform the built environment. And then finally, Michael Jennings is a systems thinker, designer, and environmental futurist focused on opportunities in transportation, especially through battery electric vehicles.
Hello. I'm an energy nerd. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about energy, but basically what I want to do, I think, is kind of share my story. I've been doing this for a long time, and share a little bit about the trajectory of my thinking as it's evolved over the years. So I've been working on energy efficiency and renewable energy systems since the Carter administration. So I started off working for the State Energy Office many years ago. Even before I got my first job, I have an environmental studies degree from Shippensburg, and the story I tell myself anyway is I kind of looked at what are all the big environmental impacts in the world, because that's what I want to spend my career doing. I want to work on the biggest environmental impacts. And so I looked at energy and food, and so it just happened to be energy. So I worked for the State Energy Office for quite a while, promoting energy efficiency and renewables, doing a lot of workshops and energy audits. I wrote a book while I was there on solar energy. We did a lot of workshops on solar energy. So I've been at this quite a long time. In 1993, I started my company. It's called Energy Opportunities, which is a part of Seven Group. And we did a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, helping them to reduce their energy costs, both in York and in Philadelphia. Did a lot of work early on around this notion of green buildings. So having an environmental degree, certainly this notion of incorporating more than just energy into our efforts. This notion of green buildings was really appealing to me. We got involved really early on in the kind of first wave of green buildings that were going on. Heard about this thing called the LEED rating system. How many people are familiar with LEED? All right. It's got good brand recognition. So caught that early wave, actually worked on one of the first 12 LEED certified projects in the world, and then devoted a lot of my time and effort, as did many of my colleagues with Seven Group, into promoting the LEED rating system. We weren't alone. There were a number of people involved with this, but we were pretty instrumental in bringing LEED to market recognition. So bringing LEED to the point where most of you have actually even heard of it. So I've literally worked on thousands of LEED green building rated projects, and have spent quite a lot of time trying to promote that system and many others. So back in 2009, my colleagues and I wrote a book on this concept called integrative design. It's kind of, you could think of it as systems thinking for building design projects. So we wrote a book on that subject. It's a process you use to help make a building significantly greener without increasing its first cost. And we did this on many, many commercial projects, dozens in fact, where we were actually able to produce buildings that cost less to build and were significantly more energy efficient, significantly better performing, not only on energy, but many other environmental factors as well. I've worked on probably some of the greenest building projects in the world, several of which have achieved the Living Building Challenge, if you're familiar with that system. So all these things are absolutely necessary, but one of the things I found after doing this work for probably about 25 or 30 years is working on incremental change within the confines of the current paradigm is not going to affect the change that we need. It's not going to affect the scale of change that is necessary. So I came to that realization probably more than 10 years ago, that this incremental approach that we'd been taking, focused on technical solutions, wasn't changing the field that we were working in. So the world that we were trying to create simply wasn't responding. So if we can show people that it costs less to do this, and you get all this great environmental performance, and people still don't do it, that tells me that there's something missing here. There's got to be a better way. So I want you to imagine something for a second. So imagine that we're able to completely replace fossil fuels overnight. So tomorrow, there is no fossil fuel consumption anywhere in the world. We've developed cheap, inexpensive technologies that are readily deployable, and that doesn't exist. So, have we solved the climate crisis? So what problems still exist? Right? So the trajectory of my thinking led me to question a lot of assumptions, I think, behind it. And those assumptions really, when you follow that trajectory and you ask about 20 whys, why is it like this? Why is it like that? My thinking leads to what needs to change is humanity's worldview. Climate change is really nothing more than a symptom for a much larger problem. And that problem is the relationship that humans have with nature. So I'll kind of end with a Gregory Bateson quote, and I'll paraphrase a little bit here. But essentially, all of our problems are due to the fact that the way humans think and the way nature works is not in alignment. So, thank you.
Hi, folks. See if we can get this working here. Nice to be here with you all tonight. I don't know if I've ever said anything in 7 minutes, so we're gonna, or six, oh, it's 6, isn't it? So I was asked to come here and talk tonight about architecture, regeneration, and climate change. Oh my. And the way that I'm gonna try to approach that is to probably too rapidly go through too many principles of regeneration and see if I can find my way back to architecture and climate change. Let's go for a ride. Let's see what happens here. But I do need to start with gratitude. What I'm going to share tonight contains a whole lot of content that I frankly didn't create. I collaborated with students and community leaders and world-leading technical experts in design and engineering of various forms. So I don't have time to give them all attribution, but none of this is just mine, is the point. So some of you have probably seen this cartoon at this point to kind of build on what Marcus was saying. I think it's a fun point. What if it's a hoax? What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing at the climate summit? I actually think that's still kind of inverted. I think we need to burn that candle from the other end, in fact. And actually, all those things and more that are on that gentleman's slide, it's very meta, right? Pointing at a guy, pointing at a slide, is that actually those things, some of them at least, are actually more accessible. They're things you can go to work on tomorrow. Whereas climate change is just so big, it feels out of reach, and turning the light off when you leave the room just doesn't feel like you're doing enough, and it's not. Okay, here come the principles. So get on with it. Do all the shit we know we need to do already. Eat your broccoli, meditate, right, all that kind of thing. But those are metaphors for some of these other things. So I believe, and we've found, that the places that need healing the most are actually also the most fertile soil for the system change that we need to address climate change and so many other issues. So go to work there. But especially us white folks, be careful about how you show up in these places. Real easy to step in it. Been there. And we need to do it with humility and actually seeking the wisdom of the place and its existing community leaders, because they're always there, no matter how abused the place is. A lot of times they're human also. So whether you're talking about a historically abused neighborhood or a forest, I think those sentences are true. Reject self-aggrandizement in lieu of collective genius. In other words, actually collaborate, and not this Lord of the Flies stuff that we all call collaboration, right? Getting together and fighting over your ideas and trying to get your ideas advanced, not what we're talking about. We're talking about getting out of our lanes to advance the collective ideas. And by the way, that feels better also when you're able to associate yourself with the best outcome instead of your outcome. It also feels better. This is a basic capacity that a lot of us don't have that is necessary for the following ones. When we do that, when we actually manage to collaborate with fairly large groups of sharp, caring people, then we can actually confront the complexity. Folks, the complexity is real, so we also need to reject the idea of simple. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Keep it simple, stupid. You gotta start somewhere. I hate these sayings because the world isn't simple. So we need that collaboration to be able to confront the reality of the complexity. So I know this is just mind-blowingly beautiful graphics here. This is my rendition of a city grid. And so what we're actually talking about here is that scales, Goldilocks scales that someone else was referring to earlier actually, that we don't tend to work at, offer more ability for us to meet system needs within a system, but then we can also begin sharing those surpluses across systems. And as we do that, it gets easier for those nodes to prop each other up. Next principle, reject realistic. We need to get past what's realistic to do tomorrow and start doing what must be done. And if we're doing this, confronting complexity with good collaboration, then that actually gets easier and we unlock greater carrying capacities of our system, but also caring capacities of our systems. We get the ability to care about all the different categories that are being discussed tonight. And weird things can happen too when you're creating surpluses of food, energy, and water in a local community-owned block scale system. You end up with money left over to build a little elevator in a system that gives wheelchair access to every existing and new home on the block, for example. Finally, embrace innovation. Once you're able to deal with and work on complexity, pushing much more aggressive goals becomes actually something that pays off much better. So what you find is if you can aggressively pursue innovative ideas in a collaborative team that's actually able to hold complexity, that problems dissolve, as my friend Bill Reed likes to say, instead of those problems persisting with only incremental progress in a problem-solving process. Oh, right, architecture. So we should, how many architects in the room? Just curious. Great, one. This is super relevant. But all service providers, right, need to actually move from client-driven, I think, to client-evoking and client-regenerating. We should be inviting our clients out of their comfort zones and the things that they want to necessarily do to begin with. But we also need to maybe let go of finding that perfect client. And actually, when we can't, we need to become it. Start projects, generate client groups, instead of waiting for the perfect project to come along, make it. And what we find when we do this is we can create proposals and even systems that actually sequester carbon, net sequester carbon, while also creating wealth-generating systems, beauty, surpluses of clean air, surpluses of water, surpluses of clean energy. This is a proposal for a block in one of the most historically abused neighborhoods in Philadelphia. A lot of these ideas we're developing in Philadelphia. I'm going to rip through that because we're not designing to a particular state of a system, but designing to create a state of change with a direction towards health and vitality of living systems. And that's, so again, we're not just breaking this down into little fragments and solving problems within those fragments, but we're creating a system that self-renews, self-directs over time. And as I said, a lot of this leadership thinking in regenerative architecture is occurring in Philadelphia, but one of the furthest along examples of this is right down the street, a few blocks. I always mess up cardinal directions. I grew up here, so I didn't know them when I grew up here. But Project Thrive, which down King Street, go farther down King Street a few blocks, and there's a project we're developing called Project Thrive, which some of you already know about and better known as the Rambo Land Project. That house right there is projected to produce 10 times as much energy as it uses, collect all the rainwater that falls on it, clean it, utilize it in a farming system that nets $100,000 a year, all within a project led by a man named Ron Rambo, who has cerebral palsy, as a demonstration project for better accessibility and social equity. All right, that's more than my time. Thank you all so much.
Hi. I'm the last guy before the break, so that's a good thing. My name is Mike Jennings. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of transportation, and this is Blue Sky Lancaster. I thought of an analogy. There's a software glitch, and Grubhub is delivering the food to you based on the size of your vehicle. So even if you're alone and you just want a pizza, you get a pizza for 8 because you have an SUV. Isn't that ridiculous? But that's what we do with our vehicles every single day. There's 2 information elements or assumptions that are going to shape my story. The first is that direct electric transportation from 100% renewable energy is the best by far. It's 80% efficient in total process energy from start to finish. The other is that critical technologies that are underpinning this story I'm going to tell you exist. They don't need to be developed much. There's a few that need a little more practice time. But there really is no blue sky thinking in Blue Sky Lancaster. And the worst, best thing that we could do would be to replace an internal combustion vehicle with an electric vehicle of the same configuration and do nothing to change the system that it operates in. We can build a better world if we embrace a new model and measure our success in new ways. Let's use efficiency, intelligence, spatial requirements, and social justice. Together, let's shift our perspective and imagine a new mental model for the transportation for Lancaster. I have to use my cards because I finished this at 3:30 this afternoon, okay? Blue Sky Lancaster. It's a beautiful day in Lancaster City. You open your door, you take a big deep breath, fresh air, and you check out your street. It's lush and green and beautiful. 65% of the pavement has been removed, so there's much more permeable surfaces for rainwater, covered with beautiful ground cover and trees. And this is beneficial because it reduces the peak summer heat temperature by 8 to 12 degrees. Your leaf pulls up, LHEEV, lightweight, hyper-efficient electric vehicle. It was summoned by you just before you left your house. This one's a 3-wheeler, 2-seater, level 5 autonomy. What that means is that no human interaction is actually required to drive it. It has a top speed of about 75 miles an hour with 150-mile range, and it gets the equivalent of a 200 miles per gallon efficiency. You're heading to a friend's house. You're going to have lunch, and then the group of you is going to head up to Hershey to see a solo performance by Keith Richards. Yeah, I know it's 2040, but some things never change. So on the way, you check your news feed, and you find an article about how the transportation system is now accessible to everyone, with cost adjusted based on income and guaranteed by the historic Freedom of Transportation Act. It's also a lot safer in many ways. Accidents have been reduced by more than 99%, and because the system is aware of the identity and number of passengers scheduled for each trip, your personalized mass transit is safer for everyone, especially women and children. The article covered the demolition and redevelopment of over 80% of the city's parking structures. Yeah, hey. Providing new housing, green space, and business opportunities for Lancaster City residents. The most important redevelopment was the creation of Lancaster's crown jewel, Central Park. It occupies the surface parking spaces between the Central Market on the east, the Ware Center on the west, King Street to the south, and it goes all the way up to the Historical Society to the north. It actually includes the footprint of the Prince Street parking garage, which has been demolished. And the development of Central Park resulted in the creation of 2 underground levels that are lightweight electric vehicle hubs, with the park sitting on top. And there's an example of this in Porto, Portugal. Really cool structure. So with autonomy and computers controlling the charging and deployment of these vehicles, nearly 100% of the garage space can be actively utilized, resulting in a capacity to charge, store, and maintain thousands of these lightweight vehicles. You think about how affordable your monthly subscription is and how nice it is not to maintain, insure, and especially in the city, try to park like in the past. Arriving at your friend's house, you jump out, your vehicle starts to pull away, and you see a little pod come up delivering some of Hawa's food and some drinks. Well, we'll let them party. Let's check on our metrics. Okay, number 1, intelligence. It's totally lacking in our, whoops, hold on, I think I may have jumped the shark here. Efficiency. We emitted 2.2 million metric tons of carbon in 2018 from transportation in Lancaster County from burning oil or gas and diesel. It was 26% of the total county greenhouse emissions. Fuel costs, in addition, take $800 million out of our local economy. If we adopt an intelligent electrified system along these guidelines that I'm talking about, we can reduce emissions somewhere between 90 to 95%, with the best outcome in 2040 being carbon emissions of 62,000 tons compared to the 2.2 million. Let's go to intelligence. It's totally lacking in our systems. Your experience at stoplights comes to mind. And with no real-time active coordination with infrastructure, vehicle, and occupants. So level 5 autonomy, inexpensive sensors, and big data technology are the keys to evolving our entire transportation system, allowing vehicles to be redesigned safely into much lighter and much more efficient form factors, with the awareness built in always in 3D space. Space requirements. The US has 1 billion parking spaces, 4 for every car. Many towns devote 50 to 60% of their footprint of real estate to vehicles. Currently, 90% of our transportation dollars are spent just maintaining the existing system. It's the definition of unsustainable. By reducing vehicle size, we literally greenify our cities, improving air quality while sequestering carbon and reducing maintenance on the roads. Many new homes and businesses, like the Conservancy was talking about, could be constructed redeveloping the sea of asphalt around us, preserving farms and open spaces. And social justice. This intelligent and sustainable transportation system ensures the equitable treatment of all, It demolishes the economic and structural barriers that have plagued Americans of limited means, physical vulnerability, or disadvantaged by location or access. Well, Keith Richards is waiting, so after eating, your party jumps on their new transport, a sleek, autonomous electric van carrying 10 people, with lounge seating, by the way. As they ride off, I would like to paraphrase that Stone song. You don't always know what you want, but if you try sometimes, you might get what you need. Cheers.
All right. Well, thank you to Marcus, Max, and Michael. I hope you've all been inspired by the talks so far. This was the first half. We've got an intermission right now. So please go grab a drink, some food, but be back here by 7:45, and we'll get the second half of speakers. So thank you so much. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we are all connected. Working together to address climate change at the community scale may be the one issue with the potential to unify us all. Climate change knows no boundaries. Caring about the well-being of one of us is the same as caring for ourselves. We saw that so deeply through the pandemic. Our final group of 5 visionary speakers focuses on how addressing climate change can build more resilient communities and economies. Jess King is Chief of Staff for City of Lancaster and is also a RegenAll board member. She'll share how Lancaster City is rising to the climate challenge and demonstrating a path forward for other communities. Samantha Veide is an associate director with the international sustainability nonprofit Forum for the Future. She works to help stretch businesses to form sustainability strategies that go beyond just risk mitigation, instead prioritizing the full restoration of our planet, both ecologically and socially. Matt Johnson is the refugee community organizer for CWS Lancaster. He builds community momentum around crucial issues by bringing together diverse stakeholders and emphasizing common bonds. Alice Yoder gives leadership to community health at Penn Medicine Lancaster General and has invested over 25 years in building coalitions that bring community partners together to address multi-sector problems. And finally, Kevin Ressler of the United Way of Lancaster County is a passionate believer that true prosperity for any one person is impossible without the equitable distribution of resources to us all.
Evening, Lancaster. It is so good to see you. Doesn't it feel like a gift to be here tonight in person together? So the danger of going like in the last set is that you get inspired and scribble down lots of notes, and there's a million things that I'd love to talk about tonight, but I'm gonna talk about cities. But first I'm gonna talk about a river. So at the beginning of the pandemic, my family and I were privileged enough to buy a set of 4 kayaks, and we spent a lot of time on the river during the pandemic. Found out that it was a really, really great way to social distance as you're working with friends, and one of our friends is here that did that with us. Paddle down the river, and honestly, we spent most of that time on the Conestoga, on just about every stretch of the Conestoga from the beginning to the end in Lancaster County. And that felt like such a gift to see the wildlife, to see the diverse terrain, to see the farm fields, to see the people who were playing and recreating in the river, on the edges of the river, and to come through the city. And if you've never seen the city from the view of the river, I highly, highly recommend it. Look for the Conestoga River Club and Todd Roy if you don't know him already. He has boats he can rent to you, take you on tours, show you what that looks like. But get on the river and see what the city looks like from the river, because if you haven't seen it from the river side, I don't think you've actually seen it. So before I get going too far, I want to just give props to my friend and coworker Douglas Smith, who's a senior planner at the city of Lancaster. He was the one, really the force behind the city's climate action plan that I want to talk about with you tonight. And he couldn't be here tonight, so I'm kind of pinch hitting for him, and I hope you'll bear with me on my notes. He talked a lot about how we have to know what we've lost to better understand where we need to go. When we think about what the ecology of Lancaster looks like, picture what maybe it used to be 400 years ago, 500 years ago. And I think if you ever spent time in County Park, just south of the city limits, you might have an idea of what that could be. Expansive tree canopy, streams and rivers, right through the middle of the city, different stream beds. Beautiful, if we can imagine that. And unfortunately, as humans, one of the ways that we've impacted this ecosystem, and some of those streams I want to specifically talk about, have literally become our sewers. We have turned our back on the Conestoga. We have literally treated it like a dump, like trash, like a sewer. And I think we have an incredible opportunity to think about it as a metric, as a measure, as a barometer of how well we're doing around our climate work writ large. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. When I started working for the city 3 years ago, my onboarding, the most memorable parts of my onboarding were at the wastewater treatment plant. If you've never been there, fascinating, you know? You never think about this stuff. What happens when you flush the toilet? The water treatment plant, how we take for granted getting clean, drinkable water that comes out of our Conestoga River, out of our Susquehanna River. We learned about the stormwater work that Lancaster's been up to for so many years to try to keep more of that stormwater out of our old combined sewer system. Lancaster's like a lot of other places in the country that has old combined sewer and rainwater systems that blend together. And when it rains, that means it overflows. And so we are responsible as a community for emitting about 750 million gallons of combined sewer overflow into the Conestoga River. So think about that. We're currently, as a city, under a consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level to repair that. So literally, when we think about what Lancaster looks like in 20 years, we have a 20-year window to do that work, to mitigate that work. So I want to talk about what I think Lancaster could look like when we get there. There's a lot to say. I think one of the other things, thinking about stormwater systems and watersheds, is that it's not just the city, but we're just kind of we're one point on this whole river. And early on, you heard the first talk with Clean Water Partners and thinking about how this is a whole ecosystem. So we are aware that we're one point on the river and part of that. So I want to share a couple statistics with you. Lancaster is 14th in the nation in terms of the biggest increases in heavy downpours. This is one of the main ways we see the impacts of climate change hitting us right here. We've had 7 of the 10 hottest days in the last 100 years, in the last 20 years. We've already seen impacts on our already poor air quality, and we have a huge propensity for urban flooding. So out of all of this, we did a climate action plan 3 years ago, and what it tells us is pretty interesting, and I think this is partly what's so exciting about what we're all doing here with RegenAll and what we have more to learn. The city government, when we measure what we're doing, the city activities account for about 3 to 4% of all of the citywide emissions. So that's kind of interesting to think about city government accounting for just 3 or 4%. And so in that plan, we've built 25 different strategies in 6 key areas to progressively reduce the amount of carbon that the city emits beyond the 2017 baseline. In those areas are energy, vehicle fleet, water, wastewater, stormwater is kind of one big utility bucket, waste, building a culture of sustainability, and carbon offsets. And as you might know, and if you're part of the city of Lancaster, you've seen this, we've done so many things over the last decade to be really proud of. We are one of the leaders in the country in terms of per capita green roofs. So there's one on this building, there's one on City Hall, there's one on the wastewater treatment plant. If you start looking around and you actually go up to the buildings next door and you can look around, you can see what that looks like from the air, which is really great. We become a LEED Gold city, one of the first cities in the country to be that. We've done so much work to increase sidewalks, street trees, and bike lanes, contentious as they are, to keep more people riding bikes and doing alternative transportation. But beyond that, one of the most important things that we learned in looking at a climate action plan and measuring how we perform is that 84% of the city's emissions derive from our energy consumption. So you think about all those little things, changing all the lights, all the traffic signals to LED, from other systems, all the changing of the street lights to LEDs, those account for such a small, small portion of what the city emissions actually make up. And so of that 84%, 70% of the whole is just from water and wastewater, and the pumping, the processing, and all that work. So that really is where the vast majority of our impact lies, and the opportunity to do so much better. We can do things through investments in new technologies like digesters for the biosolids that are coming through that process, or on-site energy production, expansion of new work to keep more stormwater out of our combined sewers. And the good news here, if you've been following the news, is that we're also looking at some of the biggest infrastructure investments that we've seen in our lifetimes. So we're gonna see a lot of that coming to Lancaster, to cities like ours, to be able to invest, and specifically into water, stormwater, and wastewater. So there's gonna be a lot more to report on that as time goes on. And I'm already way out of time here. But what I wanna say, just for closing, is that while the city's impact represents just a small amount of our emissions, what's important is city buy-in and leadership at the municipal level. We wanna do our part and also support an expansion of this work where it can have the biggest impact. And I would encourage all of you who live in other places to advocate for your places, your governments, your municipal government, your county government, and others to do anything that they can at the local level. And what I'm most excited about is this, is RegenAll, is talking about what we can do to expand this idea beyond just city, but looking at this as a whole, looking at it as the whole watershed, looking at it as the whole community and how we can have the most impact. Because 20 years from now, I hope we can all go out on that river, turn our faces to it, and really see it as the asset that it is. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. We've had about 3 people back there joking about tripping over the curtain, so I'm very delighted that I didn't. First, I just want to thank everyone for what you've already brought to tonight. One of my favorite new learnings about what you can bring to presentations is presence and less perfectionism, just trying to bring your whole self. And so thanks to everyone who's already done that tonight, and everyone who had notes. It made it a little more comfortable for me to have notes. So, for those of us that have spent much of our lives in service of sustainability and social justice outcomes, it can be hard to accept that the world is still wildly off target to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and systemic inequalities are still deeply entrenched. I do believe the famous Martin Luther King quote that the arc of the moral universe is long, and my eye reaches but a little ways. So of course, the work of my generation is just one chapter in a long book. And as my colleagues will keep telling me, I know that urgent thinking is a classic indicator of white supremacist culture, and that in many BIPOC communities, urgency isn't quite the priority that we make it. And I do agree with Adrienne Marie Brown when she says, there is always enough time for the right work. And yet, I feel anxious. I feel anxious for all of us here and for the generations to come. If you believe the science, the magnitude of the encroaching climate crisis means that we no longer have any slack in the timeline. So I find myself here today really of 2 minds. One is that I kind of want to just give up and go drink whiskey in a corner with some of you, and I hope I get to do that at the end of this. And then the other half of me is finding new hope in this emerging regenerative business movement. So you've heard earlier today about some of the concepts of regeneration. There are many organizations like mine that are beginning to apply those concepts to business. And what I think the regenerative business movement has a chance to do is to catalyze the wholesale systems change we need to get us out of this mess that is of our own making. Because we do need systems change. Tinkering around the edges is no longer an option. The system gets what it's designed to get. Let me say that again. The system gets what it's designed to get. Therefore, we need to rewire the fundamental systems in line with the goals we want it to serve. We need a rewiring of the system from the current extractive business models to one that embraces the ability of all living systems and all living beings and ecosystems to regenerate, replenish, and create the conditions for more life. And we need business to do this. So what do I mean here? I believe we have a technical problem and an adaptive one. Technical problems are problems that are easy to understand, solutions exist, and they can often be implemented by experts. For example, applying some of the regenerative agriculture technologies that we've already heard about today to repair our lands. An adaptive challenge is one that is hard to see, requires change in values, beliefs, approaches to solve the challenge, and fundamentally, the people who have the problem are the people who need to solve it. As Roz Godelick said, professor of the Parsons School of Design, a fundamental problem with our current mental model for businesses is that we think a company's economic considerations for profit maximization transcend those of sustainability. With this mental model, we all end up answering what's the business case for sustainability? I did this for 20 years. This doesn't make sense, everyone. All institutions, businesses included, are nested in humanity, and humanity is nested in the planet. As our CEO has said, and though it is a bit grim, I think it paints the right picture, there is no such thing as a thriving business on a dead planet. So, in the purest sense of the word, sustainability is damn good for business. I would like to ask a provocative question, propose a new question, and that is what is the sustainability case for your business instead? Let me be clear, this is not about eschewing profits or sound business practices. Profits ensure that a business can succeed. But as Rebecca Henderson, author of Reimagining Capitalism, has said, profits are always important, but they don't have to be the full goal in and of itself. After all, we all need to breathe to live, but breathing isn't the goal. So this is an adaptive problem. We need to change our mindset about business's role in solving the climate crisis. Okay, so back to this regenerative and just approach to business. What exactly is this? This is the definition that we've been coming up with. Pretty simple, but I love it. At its core, it is about recognizing the potential and fundamental right of all living beings and all systems to thrive. The fundamental potential and right for all living beings to thrive, from a tree to someone in your neighborhood. Going far beyond how a business minimizes its environmental impact or prevents human rights abuses, a just and regenerative approach aligns business goals in a way that recognizes our interdependence on all other people and living systems. There are positive signs. I'm excited to see the private sector waking up to this and setting net zero or even net positive climate goals. This is more than I would have ever thought possible when I started my career 25 plus years ago. Resources are being funneled into transitioning systems to be more sustainable. For example, transitioning a fossil fuel dependent energy sector into a renewable one. If we apply this new mindset, a just and regenerative mindset, we hopefully, for example, though, can center both regenerative and just outcomes and recognize that a renewable energy sector that doesn't address human rights abuses in renewable energy technology supply chains or leaves entire coal communities in poverty doesn't get us to where we want to be. So I'm going to leave you with one thing. There are many models out there about how you might repattern your business to move to one that has more regenerative and just principles. But one of my favorite is Marjorie Kelly from the Democracy Collaborative. And she recommends 5 considerations: purpose, flows of finance, governance, networks, and ownership. Let me go through those briefly. Purpose, beyond profit. What value does your company provide? How do you put purpose at the center of your decision making? Flows of finance. Not just what you do with your money, but the whole flow of money in and out of your business. Where do you get your money? What are you inadvertently supporting based on where you get your funding? Where then do you place your money, your investments? Are you looking at new business models that are more sustainable and distribute wealth more equitably? Or is your business built on extractivism and excessive consumption? Governance, one of my favorite ones. Anyone who's been on a board should like this one. Governance. Does your governance entrench power or work to change it? Who decides in your organization? And then more importantly, who decides who decides? Consider new participatory governance structures and new radical consent models. 4, networks. This is a key in regenerative principles. Your business does not exist in a vacuum. We are all part of a vast web, and your actions cause ripple effects. How are you positively influencing the networks that you're a part of? You are at several nodes in the system. What are you doing about bringing positive change at these nodes? And finally, ownership. How are you exploring new potential ways of ownership? A lot of you are probably seeing this. We're seeing a burgeoning in employee ownership, co-op, different kinds of board structures. To close out, I just want to say, I think the private sector is at a crossroads. I've worked in business or as a partner to business my entire career, and I do believe that business can be an incredible force for good. And I would so love for the Lancaster business community to be a trailblazer in the regenerative business movement, reinventing our current model of capitalism and supporting diverse communities so that we can all thrive. I would like to invite you all to continue the conversation with me over that whiskey later tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Matt Johnson, and while I am employed by CWS, this is a sort of hodgepodge of all my feelings about the way that climate and refugee matters interact with one another. So I'd like to start in Syria during the Syrian civil war. And you might think, wait a second, why are we going back all that way? But it's important because between 2010, when the Syrian civil war broke out, and now, there have been over 13.5 million people displaced from Syria, and 6.8 million of those folks are UNHCR recognized refugees. It was during the Syrian civil war that Lancaster got the title of the refugee capital of America. We got that title even though this metric has changed. We got that title because we were taking in more refugees per capita than any other community in the country, taking in Syrians, taking in Cubans, taking in people from all over the world that were escaping conditions. The question that I get all the time when I bring Syria up in terms of climate change is, wasn't that a civil war? Wasn't this a man-made destruction, a man-made problem? And the consensus among geographers and scientists is that that's not quite the case. In fact, most people who studied the issue feel that the droughts, the food shortages, the supply chain issues that caused the powder keg of Syria to finally boil over and explode was due to climate change. There were years and years and years and years of droughts that can only be explained through something like the cycles of human-caused climate change. So once we start thinking about that, we start to realize that these issues in terms of refugees are not things that just spring from political corruption, from failed states, that climate change is actually affecting those things, and climate always has. The UNHCR says that 98% of refugees in Asia will be people who were had to flee due to climate reasons, rising sea levels, flooding, and so forth. That 98%, up to 30 million people in Asia, will be refugees by 2040 due to climate change. Now, one of the things that I wanted to kind of bring from a sort of historical perspective is the fact that this is nothing new. Climate has always affected our politics. If you study the history of China, for instance, you'll see that the thing that keeps an empire going or not is their ability to handle changes in climate, flooding cycles, earthquakes. All of these things that we have to do to interact with the natural world are what keep empires going or bring them down. Many people argue that the French Revolution started because of a little ice age that made food hard to get, got people angry enough to take to the streets, and again, we kind of all know what happens there. One of the reasons that I bring this up is because we have to realize that the line between man-made and environmental disaster is almost artificial at this point, that these things are in a feedback loop with each other, and these things together are causing our modern problems. Now, I bring this up not to kind of create the doom and gloom scenario or to bring your attention to the millions of people that might be made refugees by climate, because that's been done and people have said that before. But what I want to talk about a little bit is the ways that the Lancaster community's response to climate refugees, whether they knew that or not, is a way forward for how we need to think about the ways that we're intertwined with one another, that we are in this net of mutuality, as Martin Luther King might say, and how that might help us with the climate issue. And the reason that I say that is that in my experience with people who work with refugees in Lancaster County, there are two ways of interacting with a refugee. The first is to imagine that the refugee is like a different creature from yourself, something that could never actually happen to me. You look at this person and say, this is foreign to me, I can't understand this, and I want to help in a way that maintains some distance. I'm looking at this person thinking to myself, I will never be this person. I think we all have had that experience, or we know people that have had that experience, not just with refugees, but with other people who find themselves in dire circumstances. Luckily for Lancaster, the overwhelming number of people who work with refugees in our community see these refugees as fellow travelers, see these folks as being someone that I could be. It's sad to say, but maybe the last 6 or 7 tumultuous years in the United States has brought some of us the closest that we've ever been to imagining what it would be like to have to flee our own country, to have to flee the man-made and environmental disasters that we encounter. And it's because of the vast number of people that can look at refugees and say, but for the grace of God go I, however you want to define God in that sentence, as luck or contingency or the fact that I was born here and not somewhere else, and see that refugee as someone who deserves the sense of mutuality that I was talking about before. Now, the reason that I bring that up is because I think that's the way forward. We've heard all throughout the pandemic that we're in, the same boat. And I think many people have astutely pushed back on that metaphor and said, perhaps we're in the same storm, but we're not necessarily in the same boat. And as we watch every night the devastation wrought by climate change, we're talking about, as I was writing this, 3 more I could have included in the list, but of course on everyone's mind right now are the tornadoes in Kentucky, or the massive flooding in Germany, or the sea level rise in Southeast Asia. It really is becoming true that unless you have a spaceship, we are all in the same boat. And that level of mutuality, that belief that we owe something to someone else because we could be that person, because that could be us, that we had never imagined before, breaking through the cocoon of the various luxurious democracies that we most of us in this room have been brought up in, is the key, in my mind, to breaking the mental blockage that we have to treating climate the way we need to. And the good news is, I think Lancaster has enough to spare. Thank you.
It sure is a wonderful world, but I am a nurse, and if the world was my patient, I'd say planet Earth is in multi-system failure. We are living in a major public health crisis that affects every part of our lives, from the air we breathe to the food we eat, and that crisis is climate change. Caring for planet Earth and caring for our health are the same. We cannot be a healthy person in an unhealthy planet. So let's imagine a 60-year-old living with chronic illness today. They likely have trouble going up and down the stairs and doing some basic tasks, but they're able to go outside and enjoy the outdoors and have their family and friends over for the weekend. Now let's imagine that person in 2040, 80 years old, hopefully, still with chronic illness. But life in 2040 is totally different, will be totally different than life in 2021 if things do not change. Our 80-year-old will go out for their daily walk, and the heat will slowly wear them down. Their 1-hour walk will quickly turn into a 10-minute walk because the heat has become so unbearable. When they go to take a deep breath, it's difficult for them to take the deep breath without coughing due to traffic emissions and harmful particulate matter due to the increased number of cars on the road. Because in 2040, we continue to build our communities around the automobile. However, our 80-year-old doesn't drive, so that just adds to their feeling of isolation. More people are generally unhappy because they can't go outdoors, interact with friends and family due to the risk of heat stroke. When they reach for a snack, it's less likely to be a fruit or a vegetable due to the reduced crop production. Now imagine that was your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle, a loved one, because that very well can be their story, and it could be your story too if nothing changes. Now let's take a step back and let's look at our 60-year-old. So rewind, look at our 60-year-old who still has chronic diseases, but in 2040, by the time of 2040, we have come together to look at their life differently. So that person that is 80 years old in 2040 can still go about their daily activities because we have all made changes to what's happening in the world and impacted climate change. So let's imagine our 80-year-old still has chronic disease, but we have made fundamental changes to make the earth healthier. And because we have made the earth healthier, we're able to make people healthy within that time, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. We have prioritized trees, sustainable agriculture, and green energy. Our 80-year-old friend goes out for their daily walks among tree-lined streets, and they're able to play with their grandchildren in safe, walkable neighborhood parks without the risk of heat stroke. Fresh produce in Lancaster County is booming with locally sourced produce for people to have healthier options, which leads to healthier lifestyles and reduces the risk of heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Many more people are biking to work, and they're also enjoying more green space outdoors, whether they're walking their dog, or they're interacting with friends and neighbors, or they're playing with their kids. Because we have prioritized alternative transportation, and we have built our roads around the pedestrian and the cyclist. But our 80-year-old still doesn't drive, but they're able to get around and take care of the things that they need to take care of, even though they're not driving, and meet their specific needs. So as you can see, trends are not destiny. For decades, I've seen Lancaster County people and partners come together when they were challenged and achieve remarkable things. Solutions to climate change are within our reach right here in Lancaster County. One concrete example is the new Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan called Places 2040. If you have not had a chance to look at the plan, or you've not been to a session where the Lancaster County Planning Department has held an event to talk about the plan, I encourage you all to please do that. Because to me, it gives me a real good sense of hope, and it's a very practical piece of information. It provides strategies and tools that will lead us to a healthier Lancaster County. And what I would leave you with is I'd like you all to think about 20% of how someone becomes healthy happens in hospitals and health systems, 20%. The other 80% happens within our communities, where we all live, work, learn, and play. So basically what I'm saying is, you are all healthcare workers. We are all healthcare workers, and we need to work together so that we can save our very special patient, planet Earth. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Ressler, President and CEO of United Way, and occasional rabble-rouser and ne'er-do-well. So I'm last, right? Probably because I'm a former actor, sometimes politician, and occasional preacher. So we're ahead of schedule. This is going to be fun. But that's why you got written Kevin instead of ad-lib Kevin. So I'm going to start here. By show of hands, how many of you know exactly where your clothes that you're wearing came from? And I don't mean which store you bought from. I mean, where was your shirt manufactured? And further back from that, where were the materials sourced? See, a separate but equally important question is, do you know what materials your clothes are even made of tonight? Is it purely organic materials? And I don't mean organic farming processes, I mean natural fibers. Or are you wearing oil? I mean, surely you understand, when you see polyester, when you see nylon, you're literally wearing a paper or a plastic bag on your back. Now, I know tonight we're talking about climate change, the impacts of our choices, actions on the world's ecological health, but my task is to speak a little bit wider than that, covering the question of equity with regards to climate change and human-influenced ecological disruption and destruction. But there are as many ways to talk about that as there are issues with climate change. Beginning here with clothing material doesn't really talk about the human ethics beyond the materials. Our textile industry over the last century and a half increasingly has been aggressively moved from our shores to foreign lands. The precipitating factor of this is the United States intracontinental war, intentionally chosen not to say civil war, intracontinental war brought on by some states attempting to secede from the Union in order to protect their ability to profit from human labor. But let us not let the North off the hook, because they were the demand for the products of that human capital. Remember, most of the southern states were dependent upon agriculture, profitable at the rates they were only because of enslaved human labor. When the labor force was removed, many U.S. farmers moved to other areas in the Caribbean. In fact, Brazil recruited United States farmers to go and continue to practice slavery in that country. What happened in America is we continued to oppress black farmers, first through sharecropping, and then through prison lease programs, both of which effectively continued the institutions of slavery beyond ownership of people as property. But in effectively freezing their mobility and agency, they remained essentially immobilized slaves. At the same time, America entered the Industrial Revolution and began to mechanize slavery. As we moved from man to machine, we could begin offloading many processes to other nations. While we continue to have textile mills and factories, our battles between unions and management often left out or continued to disadvantage various minority demographic populations. Other countries became bigger players in these processes, undercut wages until you fast forward into the 1980s and the 1990s when America begins the process of free trade zone arrangements with other countries. Aggressively and structurally, this supported and codified slave processes that we know as sweatshops, which most of our clothes were made in. But why this history lesson about slavery and clothing? Well, I want you to understand the very significance of the intertwining of all of these things. These are not independent. Climate change, racial justice, LGBT rights, disability work is all intertwined. You cannot have one without the other. But more specifically, your clothing is a continued contributor to global inequity in order to benefit wealthy empire nations, which, that's us. Why? So we can have $5 pairs of underwear. Whole systems are created of iniquity so we can have $5 pairs of underwear. And here's the kicker for climate change. While the solid numbers are hard to know, it is estimated that 2 to 10% of global emissions are a result of the clothing sector. Of that amount, only 1% is distribution, which when you think about how we usually talk about these things is where we would talk about the problem, the supply chain and the transportation and all of that. Only 1% of the climate impact is distribution. Well, great, I gave you a solution, buy less shit, particularly less underwear. But I was asked to speak on equity, not to speak on emission solutions or clothing or even the lasting and continuing vestiges of slavery. So what does this all have to do with equity and climate change? Again, kind of everything. Think about everything I just said and think about how significantly interconnected it all is. Our clothes today are still connected to decisions made hundreds of years ago to enslave people. And our inability when slavery ended nationally to end our thirst for consumption. In fact, after World War II, our economy was intentionally designed around consumption, thus increasing the need to create. It requires significant mechanized agro-farming, wiping of rainforests, particularly in the Amazon, heating the earth, congesting transportation. These components all increase warfare for silicon, primarily in the Congo and other African nations. All these lead to continual warming, which leads to increased sea levels rising, which is the greatest human impact on island nations and coastal areas where it not only disrupts your beach vacation, but fisheries and other coastal labor. And who gets disproportionately impacted by such things? The poor who work the fishing boats, the poor who live in mineral conflict war zones, the poor who work disproportionately in the fields, the poor who are least able to weather the increased costs of relocation from their homes, ancestral or otherwise, or modernizing them to weather changes, the poor who are most likely to work and live in the shadows of institutions that pollute their groundwater and their rivers and poison their children. Now, I know it's pretty depressing to end this wonderful event this way. Sorry, kinda, not really. The thing is, if you stop buying those clothes, 99% of the problem from that item disappears. If we just make them more locally, you only solve 1%. We have to stop being so small-minded to think that we can make quick changes at the last minute to solve these monumental and existential crises. If I wrap this up in a bow for you, leave you feeling like it's all in hand, when it isn't, you're not going to do anything. You need to make significant changes in the way that you live, vote, worship, play, socialize, talk, think, and of course, act. And we need to stop denying the overwhelming significance of our blindness brought on by our privilege. I learned my own privilege pretty significantly when I was doing AmeriCorps Vista. I managed to buy a house in a historically low-income neighborhood in the city. The street was on the upswing, but the price was still low. Many of my neighbors were stable and comfortable homeowners like me. Like me, many had houses that had been updated. Mine had replacement windows and central air when I bought it. But there was one house across the street. It was always slumlorded out. And I was walking one day in the dead of winter when I noticed their windows had all these cartoon characters. And I thought that they were curtains until I realized that they were blankets insulating the windows, that I could see holes going in through. And it took me days to realize that, because I didn't have that narrative in my own life. And it struck me that the children in those homes, studying at night in the cold, were already beginning at a disadvantage of their classmates who had more environmentally comfortable housing. Fast forward a few years, that house was vacant, but the slumlord still owned it. Now I'd moved 3 doors down and I rented out the old house. And the landlord comes and sees me putting in some tile. And he says to me, why are you putting in such nice materials? You know the people who live down here. He doesn't know I live down there. You know the people who live down here. They don't care. They'll destroy your property. And I said, I find it fascinating that you put crap into your house and expect them to care more about it than you do. And he says to me, well, you know, these Puerto Ricans, that's what he said, these Puerto Ricans who live down here, they all just live off the government on their Section 8 vouchers. And I said to him, sir, they're a pass-through. You live on the Section 8 voucher. You are retiring on the Section 8 voucher. You are building equity on the Section 8 voucher, not them. My point is this. Those of us who have much more influence and power than those who have less have a responsibility to carry more of the cost burden in making our decisions and the practices that we choose to formalize as acceptable. Why? Because that's the difference between equity and equality. If we're going to solve these monumental challenges, then those with disproportionately higher resources are going to have to disproportionately bear more of the burden of solutions. And before you say it's unfair, I offer you this trade. Trade places with those who are disproportionately impacted. No one in this room will take that deal. The cost is that equity is not equality. And so think of this. Imagine a table. And imagine that there's a bunch of people at that table. And there's 2 individuals at that table who are the hosts. And the table's full of food, and they talk, and they welcome everyone. And before they begin, they take the plates, and they put food on their plates, so full that there's nothing left in the middle of the table for everyone else. They eat all of the food that they can until they are uncomfortable. And then they scrape the remaining food back onto the plates in the middle. And they say to their guests, welcome to the table and dine on our abundance. Aren't you so glad we gave back? I hope that in 20 years, we're no longer saying that it's okay to give back of our abundance at the end of our life. But instead, we ask the question, why did you take so much to begin with as you went along the way? Thank you for allowing me to go way over my time.
Would you please give a round of applause for all of our speakers tonight? So I hope you get a chance from this to catch how big this vision is. We've been at work with RegenAll for the last 2 years, and this is really how we wanted to bring this organization forward. This is our launch event. This is, hey, we're out there now. We wanted to be able to show how climate is connected to all of these different themes in our community. It's not just an environmental cause. It's not just a, tiny sliver. It's an opportunity to really remake our communities and strengthen our towns. There's a gap that exists right now in the nation. We're not making the progress we need to on climate, and I'm convinced that one of the core reasons for that is we don't have strategies for how urban and rural communities work together, focus in the places that they know well to build more climate resilient and economically resilient places. That's our goal, and that's what I think Lancaster is so uniquely positioned to do. It's been really fun to work with these speakers, to get to hear some of the visions that they were to bring forward. And I hope that this has been as transformative of an event for you as it has been for me. Next, from here, there's a lot of different ways that you can engage with RegenAll. If you haven't gotten a chance to pick up one of the rack cards, Franklin has them in the back at our table. This has a lot of really practical next steps for how you can plug in. Another place to look for that is our website, regenall.org. On there, you'll find different tools that even as households you can engage in. We have an online calculator that lets you calculate your carbon emissions and then offset them through local projects here in our community. If you do that and offset all of your emissions, you can put one of these fine signs in your yard. We're with election season over, we've passed peak yard sign for a little bit, so you might want to get one of those. We are also offering new services for communities and for businesses to help you measure your emissions and form really tangible climate action plans that allow you to take next steps. Franklin, back at our table, is one of the people that'll be really working to develop that service. So if you're a community or business and really want to make this happen, go and talk to him afterwards. There will also be webinars coming up that you can sign up for in March for communities and businesses. Lastly, we have been an organization that's powered so far by more than 50 volunteers. So there's a place for your energy and dedication if this is a vision you really want to plug into. So with that, we are done for the night. Thank you for your attention, for coming out, and for all that you're already doing in the community around climate. Thanks again to the speakers for just a phenomenal connection of all of these important community themes to climate. Many of the speakers are still here. Please connect with them afterwards. And safe travels home. Thank you. Good night.